Hey, welcome to Select Arcane! June is Medallion Madness month, and I have a lot of blank medallions that need paint. When they first started to get popular, I would sometimes win one or two through a show, or acquire them as part of a giveaway or something. They've multiplied since then, and now I'm a little overrun. This is my first video, and I decided to choose the first medallion I ever bought, Melanie Miller's Heather in 2019. I really love her, and I've had this idea since I bought her, so she'll be chosen as tribute. I had already gone over her with a sanding sponge a while back to prepare her for priming. But just to be sure, I take my 180 grit sanding sponge and gently go over her again. The goal is to smooth any flash or seams from the molding process. This is an extremely clean cast and I really can't see any more issues, but that may completely change once she's primed. The next step is to wash her. Any oil from your hands or mold release still on the medallion might affect how well paint sticks in the long term, or it may show up after you finish painting. I just take regular anti-grease dish soap and lather her up. To get into any fine detail sculpting, I gently scrub her with a toothbrush. Next, I just place her on a piece of paper towel and let her completely air dry overnight. It's the next morning and perfect priming weather. While wearing a filtration mask and rubber gloves, I give her a thorough coating of Dupli-Color Sandable Primer in gray. I find the gray shows any flaws a lot more easily, and then I can just sand down any imperfections I find. I don't notice any, and right after she's dry, I spray her in white Tamiya primer. The reason for the change is because I want her to have a nice white base layer for her paint job, and Tamiya isn't great for sanding. I'm also completely out of white Dupli-Color primer. It's so hot here, 28 degrees, and so it took no time at all for the primer to cure. Bringing her inside, I quickly touch up the edges or any missed parts with white gesso. Then I begin to work on her base coat in metallic gold. I know. She was originally sparkly gold, so why am I repeating the steps? The thing is, resin is a very smooth material. If you paint directly on top with something like acrylics, it will eventually scratch off. I'm actually going to be using oils for this medallion, and that needs a durable primed finish, hence the extra work. Moving over to oils, I coat the entire horse in Venetian red. I put the paint on a piece of cardboard, a trick I picked up in university, and let the extra oil soak up. Then I do what's called the dry brushing technique. I dip my brush into a tiny bit of paint and I virtually rub all of it back into the cardboard. Then I paint onto the horse. As you can see, there's still a ton of paint in the brush and it covers quickly. The dry brushing creates a thinner layer of paint, letting it dry faster and allowing it to be more transparent. It also saves you from brush strokes. I add a bit of Payne's Gray and dry brush it into the muzzle and eyes, and then take a clean brush and wipe most of it off. Just to mention, I'm referencing photos off screen for the colors. After one layer, I leave her to dry in a safe place. Oils take forever to dry, so you have to be really patient. After a week, I come back to the next layer. I'm wanting a dark chestnut, similar to a copper penny. So I dip my brush in burnt sienna and dry brush it on. I start in the crease between the neck and the mane because I want to see if that's really the right color I'm aiming for. Because oils are translucent, the color changes depending on what the base is, and it really takes knowledge in color theory to know what colors you want. The burnt sienna is exactly what I'm looking for, so I begin coating the entire horse over the Venetian red. Just to point out, I started with Gamblin oils for the first layer, and now I'm using Windsor and Newton. The brands don't really matter, they all work together nicely. In my last layer I was a little too liberal with the muzzle shading, so I pull it back a little with the burnt sienna to blend the transition better. Once I'm happy with the coverage of the base layer, I move over to burnt umber. I paint into the crevices, anywhere where there may be shadows. Following my reference, I want to add different tones so that they seamlessly blend together. At this point, I'm starting to see some brush strokes, meaning that there's too much paint, so I use a dry brush to remove some of it. Now the base layer is looking a lot closer to what I was wanting, and very close to my reference. Next, I mix up yellow ochre, Payne's Gray, and some white onto the cardboard to get that light muzzle color. I dab it into the horse and blend it into the previous layer, making sure not to add too much paint. Now she's really looking like a shiny copper penny. I put her back on the drying rack and wait another week for the next layer. Coming back, I go in with darker colors. mixing a combination of burnt sienna and burnt umber. Going over the shadows one more time, I'm starting to run out of time for Medallion month, so I have to get this layer right. At this point, I decide on a light source. Shadows right and light coming from the left. I go ahead and add darker parts to the mane as well. A lot of chestnuts have manes that blend into the body color, but I want her to pop a bit, so I add a bit of alizarin crimson. At this point, she's super red. Usually I would tone her down a bit, but in this case I want her to be really bright and saturated, like she's standing in the setting sun. I put her back on the drying rack and... No, wait. Back in school, I was always critiqued for my flat paint jobs without enough contrast, so I quickly go back over the shading again in straight burnt umber. At this point, I wish I had allowed more gold to come through the highlights, but I can fix that later. Now I'm really feeling better about her. Another week goes by and I'm debating another oil layer. But if I want her done in time for Medallion Madness month, I have to move over to acrylics. The weather is saying rain outside and is looking a little questionable. In fact, the whole week is looking questionable with constant thunderstorms. So I run out to spray her in Testors dullcote anyways. A few raindrops are falling, but if I don't spray her now, I don't know when I'll be able to get the next chance, so I risk it and take her back inside before she gets wet. I go around the edges of the horse with gesso to clean up anything I accidentally painted. The acrylics are really translucent, and this will just save me time later. The gesso is dry in no time at all, and I get right into it with pencils, just lightly sketching in my background. After the initial sketch, I block in the basic colors while referencing my images off screen. The medallion's name is Heather, and she is obviously surrounded by heather flowers, so I'm going with a saturated purple meadow for the background. Honestly, for the first half of me blocking in the color, I was just going back and forth with exactly what I wanted. I'm more of a digital artist and I prefer to build up in layers, and that translates over to my models as well. By the way, I'm using Golden brand acrylics because they're not very opaque and easy to use. I go back and forth slowly building up the lighter and darker colors trying to block in the shapes. Because of this, my sketches disappeared. When I get stuck somewhere, I go to another area like over here in the foreground flowers. I had a lot of trouble with the background hills because I couldn't tell what tones they were. I was seeing purples, blues, and greens, but it was really hard to determine what the leading colors were for me, so it took a lot of time to lay that down. When I felt like I was happy with the background, I went back over the horse and blocked in her eye whites. I simply watered down some Golden brand titanium white until it was the consistency of milk. I dabbed away excess water on a paper towel and applied it to the horse. It dried in seconds, so I'd just go back in with metallic gold acrylics mixed with some brown and blocked in the iris. You know when you look into a horse's eye on a sunny day and there seems to be a metallic sheen? Yeah, that's what I'm going for. I go back and forth with metallic and brown until I'm satisfied with her eyes, and then I go in with dark blue to block in the horizontal pupil. Next up, I use Pear Ex Powders in copper and metallic blue. Dipping a nail art brush into rubbing alcohol, I mix a bit of the blue powder to create a metallic paint and apply it directly to the pupil. The alcohol dries right away and allows the Pear Ex to stick onto the resin without sealing right away. I find it a lot handier than using water or glue. I add the blue to the pupil and the copper to the bottom of the iris for a more lifelike shine. I forgo any eye shines because I'll be adding gloss to the eyes anyways. Using a Prisma color pencil, I block in the white markings on her forehead. I mentioned at the beginning that I already had an idea for this piece. One of my first horses was a chestnut Criollo mare named Sarabi that my family bought. I never rode her because I was too young, but I remember the original owner's daughter loved her too much and bought her back. All I really remember about Sarabi was her face marking, which was a crescent moon and stripe. After blocking it in, I go over with a watered down titanium white and fill it in. If the paint starts to bead up, there's too much water, so I dab my brush before applying it to the horse. I'm using my nail art brush for all the fine detail work at this point. I check her over one last time and touch up any areas I may have missed. I made this medallion super saturated and bright for a reason. The sides are going to be a full rainbow wrapping around the medallion. A subtle nod to the LGBTQ+ community for Pride Month. At first I cut tiny stripes of painter's tape to lay the blocking for the colors, but since the stripes were too small, it didn't work, so I was forced to hand paint every single stripe. I block in yellow first because it's the least opaque, and I build up each color slowly until I have tiny saturated stripes. I didn't film this part because it took nearly 2 hours and I was going insane, but the results are worth it. I take her outside one more time to spray her in dull coat before bringing her back inside to gloss her eyes, nostrils, and mouth in Liquitex gloss varnish. Sarabi is done. This medallion took me the entire month of June, but if I didn't wait for oils to cure over the weeks, and if I didn't go to work or sleep or eat, she would have taken me 7 hours to finish. This was the most detailed medallion I have ever worked on, and maybe a little ambitious for my first video, but I'm very proud of her. I hope you like her too, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!